New York, it was called the richest city in the world, but no one expected this on that day. This city, the pride of America, has officially reached the brink of bankruptcy, and the truly tragic thing was this: the people who experienced this collapse are now over 65. They still haven't forgotten the fear, the uncertainty, the dark evenings of those years. Because what they experienced wasn't just an economic crisis, it was a city's breath being taken away. The road to 1975 had actually begun much earlier. New York looked grand, captivating the world with its glittering advertisements, but behind the scenes there was a massive fatigue. People looking out into the streets still saw hope. Those in power sensed the approaching storm. The city's coffers were dwindling, debts were mounting, and bills were mounting, but no one dared to speak out, because even hearing a mayor say this was enough to send people into a panic. We have no money. For years, New York had spent more than it earned. Infrastructure, social programs, funds, salaries, investments, everything was growing, but income remained stagnant. A city official's words years later summed up that era. For a long time, New York was a poor man who thought he was rich, and the more they tried to hide this poverty, the worse it became. The city was going into debt, then into debt again, and then into even more debt. Newspapers sometimes warned with small headlines, but no one was ready to hear the full truth. What no one walking down the street in those days thought was this: could a city really sink? Giant buildings, millions of people, the lights of Broadway. Could a complete collapse suddenly emerge from beneath all this splendor? In 1975, the answer was yes. But the first cracks were quieter. It was becoming apparent that libraries weren't being replenished. Some bus lines were reducing their service. Garbage collection times were getting later, and the streets looked dirtier, and no one saw this as a sign of economic collapse. Most people called it a tired city, but the reality was much harsher. A New York teacher described those days. The schools were aging, the walls were crumbling, but there was no money. We even had to think twice about handing out papers to the kids. Another employee said every week it got worse, but no one said it out loud. This silence sealed the city's fate, because danger reaches its most dangerous state when it grows silent. By 1975, the situation could no longer be concealed. The city could not even pay its daily expenses. Banks refused to lend, investors withdrew, businessmen in the stock market, financiers on Wall Street, the city's highest-ranking officials, they all spoke the same question: could New York really fail? And this question was no longer a possibility, but a threat. Credit scores were falling, and the newspapers were publishing darker headlines every day. Is the giant city collapsing? NYC is burdened by debt. Services could be suspended. These headlines didn't just create fear, they cast a shadow over the hearts of families, workers, civil servants, taxi drivers, and teachers, because no one knew if the city truly went bankrupt. Wages, hospitals, schools, garbage collection, police, could it all stop? As people wondered the answer, a rumor began to spread through the city. Some public workers might not get paid, some hospitals might close, police numbers might be reduced. All of New York felt like it might wake up one morning and find itself in chaos. But the real turning point came when the true reasons behind this collapse became clear, and these reasons were much darker than most people realized. New York, on paper, one of the world's brightest cities, but in the mid-1970s, anyone who looked closely at the streets noticed a slowly growing darkness behind the gleam. People weren't just rushing to get to work as they exited the subway. They sensed the city was becoming increasingly dangerous. On streets once safe for tourists, shopkeepers were now closing their shutters earlier, and shopkeepers couldn't even raise their voices to complain about declining sales. Everyone was silently asking the same question: where are they taking this city? What was being discussed in city halls had become a whisper on the streets. Tax revenues were dwindling, spending was mounting, and social services were struggling to carry the city's burden. Many families still believed they could leave a good future for their children, but as the bills began to pile up, hope grew fainter. Some change was expected, but each new announcement only increased the uncertainty. Budget reports were presented, the numbers were growing, but real solutions were never forthcoming. While the city's giant machine seemed to be churning loudly, one of its internal components had secretly begun to malfunction. At this very moment, a strategy the city had been using for years became unsustainable. Temporary loans to cover budget deficits had initially provided a welcome respite, but now even that respite had become a debt. Banks were losing confidence, interest rates were rising, and the doors were closing more harshly. Every month, it took a near miracle for New York to maintain the appearance of payments in progress. The press was reporting some details, but ordinary people on the streets still didn't fully grasp the extent of the risk. But there was an invisible meter, and the time remaining was growing shorter every day. The public transportation system was one of the first areas to feel this pressure. Metro breakdowns became frequent, and train delays became commonplace. Passengers sitting in a carriage used to talk only about rushing to work. Now they shared the same question: how much longer can we last in this city? Nightly power outages erupted, and the dark streets became even more eerie. Crime rates soared, a stark reflection of the economic hardship, and neighborhood security concerns became a daily routine. Everything felt like an invisible weight was bearing down on the city. The city's critical services, such as fire, sanitation, health and security, were also buckling under the pressure. Budget constraints were suffocating institutions. Garbage went uncollected for weeks. Fires were slow to respond in some areas, and complaints of ambulance delays were mounting. People began with minor complaints. Why wasn't the garbage collected this week? Over time, it escalated into a larger unrest. Why didn't the city leave anyone to help? This growing anxiety was further intensifying the chaotic atmosphere on the streets. On the other hand, New York enjoyed national prestige, the showcase city of the American dream. Consequently, the true situation was kept secret for a long time. But while the showcase appeared bright, the ledgers in the back room were stained red. Meetings followed one another in the mayoral corridors, with some officials refusing to acknowledge the extent of the crisis, while others made darker predictions. While these discussions were not fully publicized, everyone in the city felt the pressure of the approaching storm in their bones. When these signs of collapse in daily life came together, a single conclusion emerged. New York was no longer merely experiencing economic hardship, it was being dragged toward one of the deepest breaking points in its history. The moment when this would erupt was unknown, but the city itself seemed to sense it. Every step on its streets carrying this tension. Every morning people woke up with the anxiety of what will happen today. The thought that even a small announcement could shift the balance of power occupied everyone's mind, and at the heart of this invisible rupture lay a detail that no one had yet fully grasped. This very detail, a few months later, would plunge New York into one of the most dramatic financial collapses in American history. By 1975, New York's financial picture was no longer just a series of numbers. It had become a silent pressure affecting the daily lives of everyone in the city. Budget deficits lurked at the door like a long-delayed visitor, and no one could ignore them anymore. But the real problem was the complete lack of understanding of the dire situation. For years, attempts had been made to cover the accounts with minor adjustments, revenues with optimistic forecasts, and expenses with deferred payments. This approach had seemed to work for a while, but now the entire facade was about to come undone. Banks were among the first to recognize this. When the city government came calling with each new loan request, approvals that had once been easily granted now turned into lengthy meetings, harsh questions, and detailed investigations. One credit committee member, opening the report and leafing through it, asked, "How will this city convince us it can repay us?" This statement was, in fact, an expression of the distrust that had been growing for years. New York was no longer just a city asking for loans, but a debtor struggling to service its debts. For those living on the streets, everything seemed much simpler. Bills were mounting, services were disrupted, and unemployment was rising. But behind these seemingly simple things lay complex mathematics. For years, the city's budget had expanded through high spending on social services, but no corresponding revenue streams had been created. Furthermore, some of the population had moved to safer, quieter areas, reducing the tax share of those leaving. This created a domino effect. Each person leaving took a little more revenue from the city. Cuts to critical services like sanitation and firefighting have strained not only daily life but also the economy. Garbage piling up has caused businesses in some areas to lose customers. Delayed fire response has driven up insurance costs. Poor appearance and security issues have negatively impacted tourism. Given New York's role in the national economy, it's clear these problems will ripple out. People are worried not only because they live in less safe neighborhoods, but also because of uncertainty about the future. Meanwhile, the municipal government held days-long meetings seeking solutions, but each new proposal was merely picking open an old wound. Some officials declared austerity inevitable, while others warned that cuts to social services would further suffocate the city's streets. The debates occasionally became heated, with one side of the table defending the math, the other defending people's daily lives. Whichever side supported a decision, it posed a threat to the other. As banking confidence eroded, the crisis quietly grew. And then one day news arrived that New York was unfamiliar with. Some of the major commercial banks were now refusing to lend to the city. This wasn't just a financial refusal, it was a moral blow, a loss of authority. One of America's largest cities had come to be viewed as risky, even by the financial institutions operating within its borders. Officials who learned of this decision tried to hide their expressions, but the weight of reality was palpable. This wasn't a warning, it was an alarm. This rejection was the moment the dominoes began to fall. If the city couldn't service its short-term debt, it would be unable to pay salaries, maintain services, or even be forced to declare legal bankruptcy. This possibility had never been more imminent. Decisions that had been postponed for years, with the thought that a solution would be found anyway, now stood before them like a wall. When the reports were presented, everyone was looking at the same picture, but no one wanted to speak out. On the streets, life seemed to continue at its own pace. People were boarding the metro in the morning, going to work, and dropping their children off at school. But there was a sense of unease lingering in the city. Although no one could quite put their finger on it, they sensed an approaching tremor. A shopkeeper murmured, "Where is this going?" as he swept his shopfront. A civil servant looking at his payslip wondered, "I wonder what the situation will be like in a month." It was as if the entire city had taken a deep breath and was waiting, and the anticipated moment was becoming increasingly concrete. It wasn't just debt that was on the agenda anymore, a word was circulating: bankruptcy. This word occupied a place it shouldn't have in the vocabulary of a giant city like New York. Yet no one dared to say it out loud, but everyone sensed that an imminent announcement would have such a profound impact that it would shake the entire country. And just a few weeks later, that announcement would open a door that would completely alter the city's history. The bankruptcy crisis that plunged New York in 1975 wasn't a sudden disaster. It was a moment when years of piling up decisions, ignored warnings, and unseen truths crumbled into a heavier, moreover, collapsed. While the city still appeared bright and gleaming from the outside, the silent cracks growing within had become unmaskable. The root of the problem lay in the late 1960s. It was a period of slowing economic growth, declining tax revenues, but rapidly expanding social services. Education, healthcare, housing, all of these were generously expanded, but the city's budget wasn't strong enough to carry the burden. The gap was constantly being bridged by borrowing, and these debts soon snowballed into an invisible snowball. Financial reports were peppered with optimistic forecasts, and some deficits were presented as revenues for the following year. This method provided short-term relief, but in reality, it was eroding the very foundations that had sustained the city. When banks realized this decay, their confidence was shaken. With this confidence eroded, their lending diminished. As lending dwindled, the city began to struggle to breathe. The national economy also hung over the situation like a shadow. Inflation was rising, and the oil crisis was straining the entire country's financial structure. New York, already fragile, could not withstand these waves. As middle-class families moved to other cities, the tax base shrank. Businesses moved to more stable areas. Each loss, like a chain reaction, placed a greater burden on the city. The most dangerous rupture, however, wasn't economic, but psychological. People began to whisper, "Will we really collapse?" As insecurity grew, more people moved out, more businesses closed, and less investment was made. The city had become a part of its own fear. Finally, the word began to be uttered openly behind closed doors: bankruptcy. This wasn't just a financial situation, it was a blow that shook New York's self-belief. This city had always believed itself strong, capable of overcoming any challenge. But this time, the problem was realities that had been postponed for years. And all these experiences have taught us this. The collapse of a city often comes not with a massive explosion, but with the accumulation of small cracks that go unheard for years. Even the brightest places can hide a dark silence. By the time New York heard this silence, it was too late. But that silence still lingers in our memories today, like a warning from the past. Thanks for listening. See you in the next video.